Welcome, everybody, to the Skiffy Fanny Show. We're live. We're live.
Yeah.
Daniel, we're live.
We're live.
We're live.
I'm alive.
Are you? Yeah, are you? Really?
I'm dead alive.
How do you define... Okay, no, you're a scientist. Give me a what is alive? What does it mean to be alive?
Having cells that are still doing metabolism, growing and dividing. So you still have chemical reactions inside of a sac still going on. And those reactions allow growth and dividing to make more life. To make more little sacs of biochemistry. That's all that life is. It's just contain chemical reactions that make more of themselves.
That's weird. Because then couldn't... So what differentiates my body being made up of alive things and me the alive thing? Like, if I die, right, I cease to be Shaun, but my meat sack is left. Significant parts of that are still living, even though
there is
I would
no
not
such
be.
thing as a human. Humans
My
are constructs. They're
We're a
social
construct?
constructs. Yes, because there is no such... Like, animals don't exist on their own. You're a community of lots of life forms. Right? Like, you can't survive without all those other things that aren't human. So really, we are not actual things on our own. We're kind of just like we're like mobile ecosystems for other things.
So then what makes me me?
The processing of thought and neurons.
But
I mean, you still have, human cells, but you can't exist without the community, so.
I feel more uneasy than when I started this, Daniel. I feel like my conception of what makes me a human creature, a living creature, is now in disarray. That maybe
if you think about it, like, even if you separate, like, cells from you, they're still alive. They're still you.
Are we?
They're still your cells, right? They still have DNA.
I don't... Where is
every
me?
Sperm is sacred. Every sperm is...
My goodness.
But no, doesn't that make you feel better? Like you're part of like a thing. You're part of a greater whole. No,
because I think that humans want to feel important. We want to feel like, but what you're describing it makes us less. Like, I mean, we are in a way, but in like an abstract, like everything is important kind of sense. But like as individual, unique little, to borrow the phrase, snowflakes,
we're not, right?
We're not, and that's kind of terrifying.
If we go extinct, everything else is going to be hunky dory. If the thing that fixes nitrogen goes extinct, everything goes extinct.
Well, until something develops that can survive in whatever those new conditions are.
Yeah, until like new cells survive to be able to do or evolve to do that. Yeah.
I mean, that is like, you can understand, Daniel, why there's so much resistance to this naturalistic view of the universe, because it feels kind of depressing.
I don't know. To me, it feels wondrous. So,
are you sure?
Yeah. That everything is connected, that all of life is connected, and...
Okay. I'll let you have it. Well, in any case...
From the smallest to the largest.
Welcome to the Skiffy and Fanny Show's Reading Rangers!
A boy explores the abandoned house of a dead fascist. The mountain fog is not what it seems. Kermit the Frog dreams of murder.
Delicious murder. Or should I be, Delicious murder. Anyway, I'm Shaun.
It's not easy being green. I'm Daniel.
As you drink a green drink.
A green drink, yeah.
So on today's show, we will discuss Through the Night Like a Snake, Latin American horror stories, edited by Sarah Coolidge, and releasing as of this recording this week from Two Lines Press, which is out from the Center for the Art of Translation. So that is what we'll be talking about today.
Yes, March 12th, it is due out. So before we get into the discussion, a reminder to please share your comments with us about this and past episodes at skiffyandfancy.com/listener suggestions. Some of these questions or comments might get discussed right here on future shows. If you haven't already, join us on Twitch for Shaun's Alphabet Streams to be a part of our interactive live streaming format. Finally, be sure to join our Patreon and be part of our special Patreon-only events on Discord. It only takes $1 a month to join in on that fun.
It does. I will just note, in chat, Trivity Mats has said, I would think snakes, being cold-blooded, would mostly be dormant at night, and you would in fact be wrong. Snakes typically fall into three categories. They are either nocturnal, diurnal, or they can be a little bit of both. Usually they lean one direction or another a little bit more, but they can be both. And they typically are diurnal in areas where it is perhaps too cold at night to be nocturnal, whereas in other parts it may actually be too hot to be out during the day. Mm-hmm. So like the example would be Florida, where I lived, where there are diurnal species. They tend to be things like coach whips, which are pretty fast and can handle the heat. But most of them come out actually at night when it's cooled down a bit. I mean, you will still find them out. You will still find things like water snakes and so on wandering out, but they're more active at night. And yeah, but of course, Florida for most of the year doesn't really get that cold. At night is still pretty toasty. So it's pretty fun. Actually, Florida is wonderful. If you want to ever go herping, you can do road herping in Florida, which is you just drive up and down roads looking for snakes sitting
until you spot snakes
on the road. They'll actually come out at night and warm themselves on the pavement.
They only come out at night.
So,
so are there species that can store up heat?
No, they
like from the day, or are they?
No, they typically with snakes
lose too quickly.
Yeah, like where it's cold at night, they're typically hidden somewhere where they can conserve as much heat as they can, and then they come out. They tend to be fairly lethargic when they're not warmed up, and it takes them a minute. It's actually kind of fun when you catch them before they've warmed up, because they tend not to be as feisty. They're a little more easy to handle.
Right.
But Trivity Mats is pointing out a really good thing, which is iguanas falling off trees in Florida in winter, which has now raised... There are now PSAs in Florida about not collecting iguanas because many of the people in Florida is either directly from or their families have come from various Central and South American cultures where they may eat some of these animals. So they've been collecting them, and then when they go into a warm car, they wake up because they're not actually dead, even though they're not moving. But iguanas are lizards. And lizards are a little bit different than snakes in general. Most lizards are going to be, I think, diurnal, or at least they're a little bit more, they use a lot more energy than snakes tend to do, because snakes, a lot of snakes are just ambush predators. They just sit there and wait, or they kind of wander around a little bit till they find the scent of something and then they hunt it down. But a lot of it's like ambush predators, whereas like iguanas are actually eating vegetation. They go like move around and climb stuff. So, but I may be a little bit wrong about that. There's some herpetologists that'll probably write an angry letter to us, but
send your angry letter to Shaun.
Yeah, I'm an amateur. I just want to be clear. I'm not an expert by any. I know more than most people, but that's not saying a lot by comparison to a herpetologist. I mean,
you definitely know a lot more than I do on them. But
yeah. But iguanas are fun, but they're going to be diurnal mostly, I think, if I'm correct. So that they operate by that delicious sunlight. Yeah.
And also, the title of the book is sort of out of context to some degree, because it actually comes from the last story in the collection, And I think the line actually refers to somebody just moving through the night, and their movement is described like a snake.
Yeah.
And so I don't think the snake is linked to the night in the actual line from the story. If that makes sense.
It's kind of weird. Well, we will talk about
it. But it makes a clever title.
It does make a clever title. And it is very fun, and it sounds kind of exciting. Carturo is also in chat. Welcome to chat, Carturo. So let's talk about this book, Daniel. Why?
Yes. So I first heard about this because I keep up on literature and translation from back when I still do contribute, but not as regularly as I used to Rachel Cordasco's speculative literature and translation site. And I had previously reviewed, so I have a copy of Through the Night Like a Snake here. And it's part of their Calico series. It's actually the 9th in the Calico series. And a previous one called Elemental Earth Stories I had previously reviewed for speculative literature and translation. So I was familiar with the Calico series in general, and I'm a huge horror fan. And so when I first heard about this, and that it included Latin American authors and diverse group of authors, I was like, ooh, this might be ideal for covering on Skiffy and Fanty. So I reached out to the folks at Two Lions Press about this. And so just the Calico series, they have one that's titled That We May Live, Speculative Chinese Fiction. And there are other ones as well, including one on Caribbean writing, one on Swahili stories, Queer Brazil, Arabic poems. So they've also featured poetry. But a fair number of them, I believe, have featured things that would fall in the realms of SF fantasy.
Yeah.
But the series is published biannually, and it, quote, captures vanguard works of translated literature in stylish, collectible editions. Each Calico is a vibrant snapshot that explores one aspect of our present moment, offering the voices of previously inaccessible, highly innovative writers from around the world today. So I'm a fan of the series, and I was curious to see what this was like.
Well, it's an interesting collection of stories. I think the thing you've mentioned off podcast very briefly, and perhaps we'll have to talk about this, right? This runs the gamut of different types of horror, right? There is fairly overt supernatural horror.
Definitely.
There's certainly some where the supernatural is very overt, but then kind of tests the line of reality. And there are some that are entirely not supernatural. They're horror in a very different sense, or most of the story might be horror, and then there might be a question about whether or not a supernatural element was involved. I'm thinking in particular there of the story of that the name is now escaping me, of the woman who's been humiliated and who jumps off of the mountaintop.
yes, Soroche.
Yeah.
Which I don't know if I'm pronouncing correctly either, but yeah. Which
is
basically mountain sickness.
Yeah, mountain sickness, and then she jumps off, and she's of course had this very humiliating experience that she's gone through. And there's always that question at the end of that story of like, does the thing that they describe at the end, is it actually there? Because the characters all disagree about whether or not it was present, or if she's trying to take back some degree of control by engaging in this kind of almost semi-suicidal act, as it were. I should,
but also one of like, she doesn't actually die.
Right, she doesn't actually die.
Yeah, it's not actually. It's more of like a jumping to freedom kind of thing, but injures herself in the process.
Yeah,
but.
and I will note that I'm sure we're going to mention some pretty difficult subjects, because several of the stories do deal with those. So things like sexual assault and violence against a variety of individuals. There is some homophobia in some of the stories, and there are some very graphic depictions that we won't read. But if you're reading this story, you're going to get some fairly graphic descriptions and language, I would say. At times, some might even call it vulgar at times, although I would argue on purpose. It is at times vulgar on purpose, to test those boundaries. So let's talk about some of these stories. So the first one...
I would also say that they just before you get into that, I would also say they fall into that category of the realm that I would call like literary fiction. Like these are mostly stories that are like aspiring to be that artistic kind of thing. The edge of horror, I would say. They're often open-ended in interpretation and could have like a literal kind of reading, but then also might have sort of deeper things behind them. So anyway, I think that's that, and being creepy and being intense in different ways would kind of give a summary of what overall collectively the collection kind of is like.
Okay, so let's talk about the first story. So the first story is Bone Animals by Tomas Downey from Argentina, translated by Sarah Moses. And I'm very curious what you thought about this, because I have questions regarding the stylistic choice, which I don't know how much is that is affected by translate. I mean, some of it obviously is, but I'm very curious. What did you think about Bone Animals in this piece?
I loved it. I thought it was a good start to things, because it got me thinking of, like, what's going on here? There's sort of this, so on the surface, it's a family living in poverty. They're kind of reaching to try to survive and find sustenance, find a home.
Right.
And the narrator of it is a wife, mother, who talks about basically like following her husband wherever he's going to lead.
Yeah.
But then as things go, they start getting darker and creepier, and she begins to then start to think, why am I doing this?
Yeah.
Why am I following? She begins to question her decisions that she made when she was, you know, younger or in love or at the moment, until they got into the situation where they are. And so the husband begins in this new cabin that they're allowed to stay in the middle of nowhere, basically, so that they have a home. He begins to unearth and dig up basically these little bone carvings that creep her out, but he begins like making like a little altar for them and stuff.
Yeah.
And then weird things ensue, including unfortunate things to children.
Yeah, death as a result of seeming illness. Yeah,
death as a result of things.
Yeah.
And so I read it twice. I still don't know if I completely have come up with a theory of everything or what it all means.
Theory of everything.
But it definitely, like, I liked it as horror in that it evokes terror. I found it interesting that the change that the narrator has over the course of it.
Yeah, I mean, there's this great moment where she says, "How could I have followed him this far? He's always been a dark man who's never said much. A man who doesn't say what's on his mind is dangerous." And that is kind of like the problem with the story, which is like he's going through some experience, but he doesn't ever say anything about what's going on. Things happen, right? And the story ends with more graves being dug. And again, nothing is said about what they mean, what's going on, what are these bone figures, right? He almost never says anything in the story, really, unless he's telling her what's what, basically.
What to do.
Yeah. Which to some degree,
but it's almost like it's like a cultish control that it ends up almost having over.
We have a cult story,
but at the same, we have a cult story as well. But it's almost like he's been controlling her life. Yeah, it's now going to the extreme.
Yeah, to some degree, I imagine
it's taken to the extreme of that.
Yeah, this story is probably talking a lot about gender relations because of the degree of power that's been granted to him, and without really any question. Although I don't know that the story explores that as, like, it's sort of underneath the surface. This is maybe not its main focus. The bigger focus is just that lack of control, that she doesn't know what's going on and things are happening that seem terrible, and she doesn't seem to be in a position where she can change it. And then it goes.
And how, like, socioeconomic conditions kind of cloud one's ability to have autonomy.
Yeah, that's a huge thing.
And some of the other like how you can be so easily influenced. There are others that do too. Yeah. like your socioeconomic means end up clouding your judgment of what you're willing to accept and do and who you're willing to follow.
Yeah.
And this story kind of brings that out without overtly saying it, I guess.
Yeah.
At least that's how I read it, but
I would agree. I would agree to some degree. A couple different stories deal with a version of that. The story that's about serial killers, it's not really just about serial killers. It just happens that serial killers is a part of that. That story certainly deals with that same problem because there's a lot of discussion in rather graphic detail about what poverty is like in countries under, in this case, dictatorial regimes. This one, I think, deals with it in a
and that's the second
way.
Story then.
Yeah. Well, yeah, because that's
so it's the immediate follow up to That
Summer in the Dark, which is by Mariana Enriquez, translated by Megan McDowell. I will just say, the first story I didn't like as much as some of the others, and it was mostly the style. It was it's like a little bit too terse for me. And I think some of the others I felt like were able to give a little bit more, but that may be also why that story is going to work for people in a way that it didn't for me. Is it's got a Hemingway-esque kind of terseness where perhaps there's more there. Maybe upon a rereading, I might get more out of it. But
right,
I will say that Summer in the Dark was one of my favorites. I love this story.
Okay.
Right. And I think a big part
of what.
Yeah, like part of it is I will just admit I'm a little bit of a serial killer. What is the word I want to use here that doesn't make me sound insane?
Hopefully there's another word following that statement.
Yeah, I would say like I'm interested in the culture surrounding it. I would say, right? Why we're so fascinated with it, why they are fascinating in their macabre horror that they create. And so seeing this from a different cultural perspective, for me, this is again from Argentina, and it references Pinochet and some others, which it is Pinochet in this one, is it? Am I correct?
Pinochet, yeah.
Yeah.
Correct.
The thing
it mentions others as well, but
it does, yeah. Allende is the other one that it mentions, which I think is interesting that it makes some very overt political references. But the thing for me that I thought was interesting is that some of the most prolific serial killers in the history of mankind actually come out of Latin America. That is not a comment on Latin America. I want to be very clear. It just so happens that based on estimates of murders, some of the most prolific come from that part of the world. They're also from other parts outside of the United States. And yet this story very clearly stages what I think is an interesting non-U.S. perspective on why the U.S. seems to be the mecca of serial killers. And a lot of that, I think,
best line in the whole collection.
Yes.
Was from that.
It's such an interesting treatment that they view it as like an American phenomenon, that serial killers come from America. They don't come from Argentina or from that general region, right? This is where they come from. And from the perspective of an American who finds the culture around serial killers very interesting and wants to understand why we're so obsessed, that brings all of that up to sort of suggest to some degree that the story is like exploring the idea that America seems that way because we obsess over it. Even though when you look at the actual numbers, right, there are serial killers, more or less everywhere in the history of mankind going back. Like some of the most famous serial killers in history are like Jack the Ripper. I'm sure there are famous serial killers in other national contexts other than the United States or even the UK outside of the English language. And yet this story still seems to be affected by the media narrative that the United States presents and comments on it. I found that very interesting. Immediately went, there's something cool here going on in this story. And I will shut up for now. Daniel, you please talk.
No, I agree wholeheartedly. I liked every story in this collection to some degree or another. Or at least I thought everyone was really good. in its way. There's certain stories I did not like because I found them too disturbing personally or difficult to read. But I thought they were good nonetheless. But this was one that I thought was good and I could read, but it wasn't amongst my favorite. But what I did love about it is that exactly what you were talking about. And what I found interesting is their comment on why are there no serial killers in Argentina is on one hand, they say, well, there are, but then they also say they just become government officials, like agents of the government and the oppressive regime. Yeah, and they can do what they want there.
Yeah,
but then the other point...
Oh, can I read the line?
It says about America?
No, about the
okay, dude,
officials.
Say that then.
Because the dad says Argentina has no serial killers unless you count the generals, right? And it's like a definitional argument. They're not really serial killers because it's official, right?
Right. It's state-sanctioned serial killing.
Yeah, right.
Exactly. Yes. Yeah. or regime-sanctioned. Yeah.
It's a very clever line. I really like that. Yeah.
And then the other clever line that I absolutely adored, I think it might have been the mother. I don't know, one of the characters said, I couldn't find it just looking through briefly, says, I don't think there's actually more serial killers in America. I just think America's better at selling it. That we've capitalized on serial killers and turned it into an export. And I found that as a really interesting commentary. Reading it as an American, obviously.
Yeah, but it goes back to some of the criticism when the was it the Ted Bundy biopic, I guess, that came out, right? Where a lot of the criticism
on Netflix,
of that, where people were saying like this is exploiting the families and the those that have died, and it creates sort of this sensationalist treatment of this figure, and to some degree, that is precisely what America has done. As Paul is saying in chat, America has figured out how to turn serial killers into a capitalistic endeavor. And I don't just mean like fictional serial killers. We do that too. Like literal real ones, right? Ted Bundy, all of these figures who become these larger than life figures. There's a whole cottage industry dedicated to telling the stories of serial killers. And I hate to say it this way, but the more salacious and more deaths and the more bonkers the serial killer, the more likely there are going to be many documentaries about them. In fact, charming serial killers even more so than non-charming ones, which is why Ted Bundy and some of the others get even more attention because even though they may not seem charming because of what they actually are, the way they're portrayed to us gives that sense of like, look at them, they're just like the rest of us, and like, isn't that so interesting? The ones that don't get as much attention tend to be the ones that we associate with deviance automatically, right? So Ramirez is actually mentioned in here, the Night Stalker.
Oh yeah,
he's one of the rare exceptions, but for the most part, those kinds of figures tend not to be discussed to the same degree as the more quote unquote charming versions. And
even of those two extremes, the author, Mariana Enrique, I think is making commentary throughout it on the what's the word?
Fetishization.
Making them into a fetish. Fetishization?
Which the characters
How do you say that word?
The characters essentially
the characters are with these two young girls, these two adolescent girls, effectively, or teenage, I guess.
Yeah, somewhere in that
girls
territory.
Are, they fetishize these serial killers. And the one comments on how like, oh, the other one, like I'm really into, I forget which way it is, but one is really into Richard Ramirez. Yes. Even though he's unconventionally not handsome and is scary looking and deviant in nature. Whereas the other one goes for the more standard, good looking, like hunky Ted Bundy, who is more relatable in terms of how he looks, quote, normal. And so there's a lot of commentary in the story going on.
Yeah. And I just realized
too, of what that does to the mind.
I just realized that Ted Bundy wasn't the one I was thinking of, although there were some biopics about him too. It was actually Jeffrey Dahmer was the one I was thinking of, the very famously discussed one. They both got criticism, but the Jeffrey Dahmer one I think got more considerable criticism. Yeah, so anyway, you're completely right. It's a very interesting story that is sort of dealing with like what it's like living in like these single family homes where they have like one bedroom and power may be turned off at any point. They could be unreliable. You don't have access to a lot of reliable television and so on. It's hot and muggy. There's not enough money. There's even a moment in the story where the father is like saying like you're basically looking down on me because I can't get regular work, but like you're in a country where things are falling apart, quite literally, right? You have dictatorships and there's questions about whether the military is going to remove the government because it's being ineffective, or maybe that's what the people think, not necessarily individuals. So this is for me one of the best stories in the piece. There's so many layers to it. And I think we've only kind of barely scratched it, but I really recommend it.
Because then they encounter an actual serial killer in the book, or in the story.
Not, though. He just kills his family.
But, yes, correct. You're right.
They say he's
so
technically
a killer,
not.
but is he? Yes, not.
Yeah.
But this story has more length to it to kind of get into all those layers, too. It's one of the longer selections out of the 10 in the collection. Yeah,
I agree. It's a very good one. I like it very much.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's just one of my interests. It just, comes from a different cultural perspective, which I really appreciate. So, A+, Enriquez. So then the next one is a story that we've already kind of briefly mentioned, which is Soroche by Monica Ojeda, translated by Sarah Booker and Noel de la Paz. And I probably got my pronunciations a little off. I'm doing my best. Which I will say was the hardest story for me to read. It was very uncomfortable. The basic,
at least parts were.
The basic premise is there's this event that happens while they're hiking in the mountains. It's narrated by several different characters who almost like they're being interviewed by an off-camera interviewer. They decide to take one of their friends up on this sort of mountain hike. They keep mentioning that there is this mountain sickness that people get, which maybe is the thing that affects why they all see very different things when they're up on the mountain. And the understory of this is that Anna has been horrifically shamed publicly because a video that she made with her husband, a sex video, went public, and now everybody has seen her aging body and in all of its eccentricities. I'm trying to be very nice about it because the story isn't. The story has multiple characters mention her body, but there's actually one section where Anna actually describes her body and how she feels about it in, I think, a little bit excessive, but I get what I think the point was kind of made after like maybe 7 or 8 lines, but goes on in like very uncomfortable detail. And then this is one of those stories where the question mark is there a fantastical element? Because not everybody agrees what they saw was in fact what they saw, right? At the end, she jumps off, she survives, but she jumps off the mountaintop, as it were, part of the mountaintop, and there is maybe something that is there that gets involved with her in this instance. But again, not everybody agrees that that's the case. So Daniel, what did you think?
It's really it's kind of like allegorical darkness that's taken over her from that shame. Because she is in that stage of self-depreciation, where she's beating herself up and feeling ugly, feeling worthless, way worse than how other people are treating. Like, even though people are treating her badly or talking behind her back, but nothing compared to the way she's treating herself as a result of this. So it really gets into that aspect of horror of what that can do. And so it's a group of women that go on this hiking trip, and they're all quote unquote friends. But they are,
correct.
Quote, yes, they have very different personalities. And so what I loved about the story is you get snippets as the story continues from each of their perspectives and each of their unique voices and point of views. And so you have the one that, is basically really snooty. You have the friend that's like the very self-righteous in terms of religious and looking at everything, like trying to cast everything. I wouldn't say self-righteous. I would say she's trying to put a positive spin, like, oh, I know this horrible thing happened to you, but it's all for the good. God has a plan for you. Yeah. Like that kind of thing. I forget the other friend now, but and then you have the woman who this has actually happened to. And so on the back of the collection, I read a few of the ones for the intro to this, but one of them, they just mentioned a leaked sex tape pushes a woman to the brink. And it's both a literal brink, it ends up being, and that metaphorical brink. And the story captures that, I think, really, really well. And it's not just a brink for her, it's like a brink of realization for the friends as well. They don't have much self-realization that ever ends up happening about themselves, but I think they begin to see just what trauma has occurred to this woman as a result of that video being leaked.
Yeah, I mean, we get to experience that trauma. I mean, she literally hates herself. I mean, she thinks every part of her body is disgusting, which I imagine for a lot of men and women, but especially women, they could understand that. Especially these are aging women who have already probably been told culturally that a lot of their body is automatically, disgusting because it is, aging and wrinkling.
Past its
in your
prime.
Body. Yeah, it's past its whatever all that nonsense is, right? And it's extra violating because it's a private affair, right? This is not meant to be leaked. It's supposed to be something you do in the privacy of your own home, something that probably, I think, based on the way the story describes it, she thinks she's being sexy and she's doing this thing for her husband and all of this. And, people can be unbearably cruel about, like, you don't meet their standards, so we must make you feel even worse about yourself. And that compounds and gets more and more extreme as once we hear what she really feels about her body, every inch of herself she insults. She thinks of all of herself as disgusting. The sounds she makes, all of it. And it's very affecting, maybe a bit much, but I can understand why the author chose that. And then there is the maybe fantastical piece, which is there is an Indio, which is the Spanish colonial word for the Austronesian peoples of this rough region. The story is
I completely forgot about that. Yeah.
Which this story is from an author from Ecuador, and again, the question becomes: is the Indio actually there, or did they imagine it? Because there's also this image of the condor, the Indio and the condor, and I couldn't quite tell if they meant that the Indio was a condor or became a condor, or that she envisioned herself merging with the Indio and becoming a condor. It was a little confusing, and I just didn't have time to reread, but there was some interesting play there. I'm glad that they do talk about the condor as being a wondrous creature, which it is. It's remarkable and terrifying because it's massive. But again, right, none of the characters agree. They all think for different reasons. This, despite the fact that one of them is quite religious and one of them is a bit snooty. And yet nobody can agree that was it actually there? And the question kind of is raised, does it really matter? I love this last line, which actually is from Anna's perspective, which is, and I knew as I watched the Indio's metamorphosis, presumably into a condor, that to die after taking a piss on the future could be my ultimate act of dignity. So I did it, kid. I folded my wings and failed. Which there's a lot packed into that. That she's trying to take back something by engaging in an even more vulgar act, by literally dropping trout and taking a piss on the mountaintop. Under the guise that maybe by doing that, she can reclaim some of her power again. But yet the implication is that she maybe doesn't quite do so. And it's a little, that's dark. It's harsh. I like that line. I don't know. I think those last lines are...
I don't know if it is or not. I think, yeah.
Well, I mean, she certainly doesn't come to a full, moment of realizing... she doesn't quite get it back.
No.
Yeah.
I don't think we're given an answer that she has by the end of the story.
Yeah.
But I don't know I don't think that's the end of her story.
No, it probably
and
isn't.
it kind of ends in a lot of ways, even though the last line may be from her. The perspective of the history of the passage of time, the last thing we hear about her in terms of temporally is from friends that still don't quite get things. And so
there's a lot of ambiguity, which actually makes me appreciate the story a little bit more.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Do you want to move to the next one?
Sure.
So this one's in the mountains.
And so in the mountains.
Yeah. Go ahead.
Yes.
You
by Lina Munar Guevara from Colombia.
Guevara.
Guevara from Colombia, translated by Ellen Jones. And so this is another one that's pretty short, and it's primarily atmospheric in nature, both in terms of the plot and in the overall effects of the horror, because it involves a character driving on a mountain road in the fog. And maybe there's a car behind them that's creeping up, but actually maybe it's in front of them. And maybe there's a break in the guardrail that they pass maybe once or twice. And there's allusions to ghosts and hauntings. And one kind of gets the sense that this traveler might not be on an actual road, but maybe, at least my interpretation, a ghost haunting this stretch of highway where they have died. But there's probably a lot more interpretations. Even though it's short, it's an ambiguous story. What was your take, Shaun?
Yes, I think there's some ambiguity there, but there is some play, I think, with the way windy mountain roads work, because, they describe it, maybe behind it, maybe in front, maybe the guardrail is out, all of these kinds of things, and they're like, the guardrail's a separate thing, but, when you're on one of those windy roads, it can often seem like you're doing this like winding lights, where it can at times it's in front of you and then it's behind you. Like there can be that slight illusion
depending how the turn is. Right.
Yeah, depending how the turn is. And then like the guardrail thing, well, that is a thing I've seen driving where someone has clearly gone through a guardrail. And so that's pretty terrifying, because if somebody's gone through the guardrail, there are many different possibilities for why that's happened. But that also means it can happen to you. So that's a little uneasy, right? I mean, mountain roads are terrifying to drive on. And I will just say, as somebody who's been on a large tour van/bus in Vietnam, driving up into the mountains to Dalat, when they're driving extraordinarily fast and there is no guardrail and all you see is down for like 1,000 feet, it's pretty scary. Thankfully, I've not gone over the edge unless this is a ghost conversation, Daniel, and you're not real. Oh, please tell me you're real. So anyway, yeah.
I believe yes.
I agree. I think this is one of those where it is very atmospheric, but I think because it's so short, it kind of runs into like the problem of it's kind of over too quick, and there isn't quite enough to latch onto. I felt like that you can kind of get the idea, you can play with the ambiguity for a little bit, but eventually it just you're kind of done with and it's because it's just so short.
To me, though, it was like one of the most terrifying ones.
Really?
Because it begins and ends in kind of the same way.
Oh, okay.
And that it begins, it's been years since I took the south exit. I've hated it ever since I was little because of the mountains. I know I lost something there, something important, but I can't remember what. And then it ends. I like the mountains.
Yeah.
I always have. I know I shouldn't like them because there's something I'm looking for here, something important, and I can't remember what. It's that's scary to me, that sense of your mind, like being cognizant of something, but being utterly lost in time as a non-corporeal entity.
Yeah, because you might be a ghost.
Sounds like, to me, that's more terrifying than seeing a ghost, being a ghost. Yeah. That's what I like about this story to some degree, is it gets you in that that kind of mindset. But I agree with you that it's too short to really grab a hold of more than that.
Yeah.
And there's an element about the narrator talking about, I think it's a he, but the narrator talking about their grandfather's house and that the house had lots of mirrors. And I never quite got what the significance of the mirrors were. And what the author was trying to do with that. So there were parts in the story where it just wasn't enough there for me to grab hold of like what the intent was. In that regard.
Well, that's a good question. What is with the mirrors? That might be a question for Carturo, who's in chat. We may have to move to the next story here, but is there a particular cultural significance, Carturo, in Colombia with mirrors that maybe we're not getting because we might lack that cultural context? And while you think about that, we might move to the next story and start that conversation. Then we can kind of circle back.
And he forbade them from touching the mirrors. He didn't like them, but they were all in the house, and he didn't want anybody ever touching them. It would be bad, too.
That is interesting. Maybe he's trying to capture vampires? I don't know. Yeah, Cartero says in chat, not that he's aware of. So there may just be something we're not quite getting, and that might be one where maybe a reread would help pull that out. Yeah.
Right.
Cartero does
so
say
then we have another weird one.
Hold on. Cartero's got a thing.
Oh, yeah?
Cartero says once he knew a lady who covered all mirrors in her house when it rained because she believed it attracted lightning. That's interesting. So maybe there is something there, but yeah, we might have to unpack. Okay, next story. The Third Transformation by Maximiliano Barrientos, translated by Tim Gutteridge, which is out of Bolivia. And this one is about Nazis, question mark?
Yeah, Nazis into the occult and weird transformations. And
yeah.
You can't really go home, and sometimes it's good not to go home to where you grew up.
Yeah, so the story takes place that there is this, that the Helmet family, there's the Helmet place, and they, it's at some point when they were young, they went there, or one of them went there, and the other did not. They lost touch, and then he came home to check in on Eduardo because his friend has fallen ill, and he's trying to figure out what went on, and things rapidly descend into very terrifying prospects where it is apparently there is some supernatural connection to this Helmet family who are all coming back through Eduardo at first and then the narrator second by quite literally
and Eduardo's mother.
Yeah, and the mother, and repurposing their bodies to basically rebirth them in very graphic and disturbing ways. Yeah. And it is
with flowers and tubes, like turning the body into a flower with teeth in the stomach and tubes. And
like the belly button at one point, teeth grow out of it.
Yeah,
it's very really, disturbing.
Yeah, disturbing.
Yeah, and this goes to I'm guessing a part of this is, I mean, I kind of read it as a story that's to some degree about this old German that they talk about is effectively is an escaped Nazi, is what they're really describing, which is a thing that perhaps has been overly fantasized in some respects, but talks about that kind of reality of the rot that they bring with them because of the ideology that they espouse. And this is like infecting from within to some degree, growing a literal monstrosity that consumes people and can rebirth again. It's I love it. It's also horrifying, and I don't know what the deal with all of the metal music is. The metal is innocent, guys. Metal is innocent. It's not.
I have an idea.
Go for it.
So the two characters, when they were the narrator, or the point of view character, and then the one Eduardo who gets sick. When they were younger, teenagers, they were really into metal music, death metal and such, and everyone in their town basically said they were just Satan worshippers and evil and ostracized them.
Yeah. Because
that's what they were into. And so I found that, and then Eduardo disappears for days, and they're searching for him, and what gets blamed is the death music, the heavy metal music, not the Nazi guy who's living in this farm that experiments on people, right?
Yeah.
And so I took that really as a commentary of culturally or politically, here we're worried about these things like whether or not death metal is satanic and corrupting our youth, while we have Nazis hiding out living amongst us, and that we're not concerned about. That family, they kind of look at them as weird, but they don't want to touch them. They don't want to confront them. They don't want to say anything against them. It talks about how they'd see the family members in town, but basically just ignore them.
Yeah.
So it very much rang true to me in terms of being a story about ignoring actual horrors and making up fake horrors to be indignant about, when there's something else that should really be taking up your attention.
Which to some degree is true of the United States when, they begin to blame hard rock and heavy metal and all of these things for the ills of society, looking for, occult cults and satanic cults and all of these kinds of things, instead of looking at perhaps what may actually be going on, which is not the lack of appropriate religiosity, but, mental health and other kinds of things that are, the way we treat people and that kind of stuff. There may be a different level of rot, as it were. So a different cultural perspective, but gets to similar ideas in a different way. This is one where you could maybe do some unpacking. I like it. It could be could be a short horror film for sure.
Oh yeah. The plot of it read very gothic to me. It actually reminded me of like a plot of a John Bellairs novel, of like this evil wizard trying to come back through other people, like resurrect themselves to some extent.
Yeah.
And it really went out to bonkers kind of weirdness at the end, and so I enjoyed that.
There's a lot of interesting stuff there. Okay, next story, because we got to try to...
Yeah, we got to go going. Yeah.
Yeah. Visitor by Julian Isaza, translated by Joel Stryker, which is out of Colombia again, which I will let Daniel start with because I keep talking so much. So you, Daniel, go on.
This was on my first read of... I didn't read every story twice, but this was one like I absolutely adored reading it the first time, like right off the bat, and connected with. So a woman... talks about basically she's a person who consumes media like Ancient Aliens, kind of conspiracy theories of Atlantis, not just Ancient Aliens, but all those sort of alternate history type things. And so she's into this conspiracy theory type stuff involving that. And all of a sudden she finds this little green creature in her backyard, if I remember correctly, or a garden somewhere outside, that she assumes is an alien, but it kind of looks like her son's, who's now an adult man and no longer talks to her and lives somewhere else. His childhood Kermit the Frog stuffed animal. And so she takes this weird alien creature inside and starts trying to care for it, and she goes to give it food, but rather than eating her food, it like gives her a hug. And she soon realizes that it hugging her is nourishing it, and it's basically taking energy from her. But she's like, I feel fine, everything is hunky-dory, so let's just go with this. And so she's basically like having a little E.T. kind of Elliot kind of friendship with this creature that she's an alien. And then eventually her estranged son, shows up at her door saying that his wife, he's lost his job, if I remember, like money, everything. His wife is leaving him. Yeah. And we have no explanation for why this really happened or why he's now come back to his mother or what the rift was, but he's come back, but she's now, before she would have welcomed him, but now she's kind of like, well, I got this thing in your room that looks like your childhood Kermit the Frog doll. And so she doesn't want to tell him, but she also isn't sure what to do to let him in the house. And the Kermit, the alien type thing, starts telling her, giving
Kill
her
him.
dreams of murder.
Kill him.
Kill him.
Yeah, basically. And she does.
Meanwhile, it's taking more and more from her. And then at the very end, you get the sense that this is actually, at least I did, that this is actually his childhood Kermit the doll, frog doll. That it wasn't an alien creature. It's just like a Chucky type situation.
It could be.
Where it's this animated thing from childhood. Because she like searches around the house to try to find it. She's like, I can't find it. What happened to it?
Yeah. It's one of those where there's a bit of ambiguity again at the end about whether or not the thing is real. Right, whether or not it was real all along, or if it was something that was always growing inside of her, and she just finally snapped, as it were. We don't really need to know what the old rift was with the son. His behavior is pretty reprehensible. There doesn't seem to be any justification for why he treats her so poorly. She feeds him. She doesn't complain about anything, and he just treats her like garbage. And so, well, I'm not saying we
and
should...
so does the Kermit then, in a way.
Yeah. Well, I mean, kind of. The Kermit is taking energy from her, but is showing affection and love in a way that the son, as an adult,
that's true.
doesn't.
That he does not. That's true. Yeah.
So maybe to some degree, there could be like an element of where the Kermit is, like your kids take it out of you, right, when they're little, right? But they exchange it for love, right? They take your energy and your time. But there isn't that exchange. But as an adult, right, he doesn't provide, like, he's not giving her anything, right? He's taking and taking and taking, and she's giving giving. And it's sort of like...
Yeah, that's true.
Killing him and is perhaps...
She's found a better son.
A better son in her alien Kermit. Yeah. There's a thing to be said here about family that I found. I really like this story. I think it doesn't really make us raise the question of whether or not she's justified. It more looks at what happens to people when you just treat them so poorly that they start to lose that willingness to sort of take it, and then eventually they just snap and then give you rat poison in your food. And I will note, while he's dying, she caresses and comforts him as he's dying, which I think is very interesting, that she does poison him.
Only a mother's love.
Only a mother's love. Yeah. And she did. Yeah, I brought you into this world. I can take you out of it. All right, next story. The Man with the Leg. By Giovanna Rivero, translated by Joaquin Gaviland. And this one is out from Bolivia again. Go on. What's the deal with the leg?
Woman and her husband, if I remember correctly, are in the city.
Trying to have
a baby. They're in Chicago, right? Yeah, she's trying to have a baby.
In New York, I believe.
Chicago, or is it New York?
It's New York.
All right, it's definitely, is it New York? Okay. And they come across effectively a beggar on the street who has a lame or dead leg that's turning gangrenous, and is begging for money to be able to have this treated. And so she actually gives him a little bit of money, but then they run into him again, and they end up taking him to a apothecary that's actually basically like an occult healer. And they come out afterwards. She comes out afterwards with a package, a little bundle nestled against her bosom. And the guy no longer has his gangrenous leg.
Yeah. It's weird. This is one of those stories where I think the concept is fun, but I've never in my life been more disgusted by the descriptions of genitals in my, like, I'm just sitting here going, like, maybe the reason you're having so much trouble having a kid is because every time you talk about this, it's like the most disgusting, like, you should just stop having sex. No more. Like, you don't enjoy this. You should stop and run. Because there are some very squelchy, gross kind of descriptions, because the characters are going
About
through a bunch of
biology,
treatments.
yeah.
Yeah, biology, but
Yeah.
describing it in a way that does not feel romantic in any way. It feels
not at all.
very gross and uncomfortable, and it's very strange. They're going through fertility treatments, so to some degree, I suppose there's an artificiality to that anyway, because you're talking about like messing with your hormones and all of these kinds of things. I suppose it would make you think more scientifically rather than romantically about the act, because of course it is. Right, and I do find it amusing that at the end they're just like carrying, we assume, this man's leg to go take it to a place where it's a sanctuary or whatever, and people think it's her
as
baby.
a sacrifice, effectively. Yeah.
Yeah. They say,
yeah,
cover your
it was
baby.
unclear to me if like it's going to transform into like this act is now going to give her a baby.
Who knows?
Was unclear to me like what the interpretation of what the end result for them is, but like her act of kindness and faith in the occult over the faith in the fertility scientific kind of practice, like seems to be what the direction that things are going.
Yeah. I don't know. I don't know that we're supposed to
yeah.
take any conclusion from that. It's very strange. I mean, the end of it literally, all it is like, cover your baby, sweetie, and she just says that's what she did, feeling the now discreet and sweetly fetid scent of the offering, and only then did I start to cry slowly while the train continued its fatal march through the cold bowels of New York. Right, so
yes.
What is she crying about at that moment? Is she crying because someone has perceived her to have had a child that they've been trying to have? Or is she crying because she doesn't actually have a child and they perceived it? I don't know. We don't.
Or is it tears of hope over what this offering now will achieve?
I don't know. Is that what the offering is? We don't know. So
no, we don't. Who's the offering for? It's unclear because they kind of like go in and they come out, but you don't know all the details of what happened inside.
There's more story here. Is really what I'm hearing.
Definitely ambiguous. Yeah.
Well, let's move to rabbits. That's the next one on the list, which is by Antonio Diaz Oliva from Chile, translated by Lisa Dillman. And this is another one that I really enjoyed because it's about cults.
Oh, okay.
It's the cults one.
This was the one, like, I completely was like, which one was this one? I couldn't even remember. And yes, okay.
Yeah, so this is the one that
yeah, it's basically like the Rumspringa.
Yeah, but it's a very twisted, weird...
It's a commune, and the young couple that are about to get married get to go... Right. Right before that, they each go around 16, 17 years old. They get to go out into the real world away from the commune for a year and experience what the city and general life outside of the commune has to offer, and then decide whether they want to come back and join the commune or not. Right. And deciding not might not be good for them.
Yeah, this is actually the one I will just note. This is the one that's about Pinochet and Allende in the background, not one of the earlier ones we mentioned, which is actually the wrong country entirely, if I'm correct. Chile is Allende and
it was
Pinochet.
A different...
Argentina would be... it's escaping my mind
that's
at
right.
the moment.
I should have known
totally
that from Moxie
person.
Purvis.
Yeah, I'll hunt it down later when I need to. But yeah, so this is ostensibly, it's about cults, very extremist religious communities to some degree. They're not necessarily strictly religious. But the story deals with an interesting problem, which is what a lot of cults have, which is there's something buried underneath the surface that is no good. And it turns out in this cult, that is exactly the case. And it has pretty significant ramifications, not only for the main character, but for the cult, the commune itself, once that's revealed, including its political protections eventually are sort of taken away from it. And then there's the rabbits, which is alarming. The rabbits, I think, are symbolic of something else. but I wasn't quite sure what quite to make from it. It does make the one
I-
reference that rabbits hump a lot,
No.
but that doesn't seem to be like fertility doesn't seem to be its primary focus.
No.
Yeah.
They're almost like monstrous rabbits.
Yeah.
Like not in a Monty Python in the Holy Grail sense, but like just their size and
They're like uncomfortable.
almost like predators unto themselves. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't quite know. It's very there's something there that I don't know that we may have to come back to, but I do like that they deal with like that the cult, the way this commune operates is the way a lot of these operate, where like they set this situation up where you're supposed to go on this, like everyone goes on it. They go out for like a while, spend several months away from the commune in order to experience the world outside, and then they have to make a choice. But like that is obviously
their formative year.
Yeah, it's a false choice though, because your entire community is back in the commune, not in this foreign location, right?
That's where you have your safety and security and
precisely, like, and then to some degree that's kind of by design, because if you choose not to come back to the commune, you're cut off entirely, right? And even in this weird situation, this commune is to some degree protected by the military government of the nation, right? It has some unspoken relationship, right, where quite literally if they want to go, when they go on this version of Rumspringa, they go for like a 2.5 hour hike to this hut where there's this military guy who takes them into town. Everything's paid for, and then they decide to come back.
Presumably appointed by Pinochet. Yeah,
right, not Pinochet. This one would be Pinochet. Yeah,
yeah,
correct.
This one would be. Yeah,
yeah, and then later
Chile,
by whoever followed after that. But it's like all that mystery, and then again, right? I wondered if the rabbits were, because the rabbits are so often thought of as fertility, it's meant to make us think about the fact that a lot of cults are basically sex cults. But this is a cult of violence, right? This commune takes people who are deviant or quote unquote deviant and brutally murders them and then buries them in this like compost pit thing that they use, which is, Carter's asking in chat, what happens to the rabbits? Well, the rabbits just keep reproducing. And then when they kill them, they just put them in the pit, right?
In the pit with the humans. Yeah,
right.
With the human remains, too.
There isn't really, I don't know what to make of the rabbits. It's called
like
rabbits,
a violent regime turned into a commune.
Yeah.
Like it's a microcosm in some way of the
larger society.
The larger military, regime. Just more insular and now incestuous.
Yeah. Well, I mean, there is that line it repeats, right? Which is like the 3 elements that every human needs are, was it spirituality, food, and shelter, I think.
It ends with that.
Yeah. It ends with that, and it says it a couple times
on the
earlier.
inside, we had food, shelter, and a spiritual refuge, the 3 elements every human being needs. Yeah. We didn't have it so bad.
Except, I mean, but that is...
Which is also what the regimes are doing, right? Like, if you think about authoritarian regimes, it's to give those things.
I mean, that's precisely
like we are
right?
Doing,
like,
at least that's
fine.
We're giving you these basics.
Yeah.
Everything's good.
Everything's
what more
fine.
do you need?
Nothing's wrong. Everything is good. We've got food, shelter, and spirituality. We've got everything a human needs.
Ignore the rabbits that we're shooting and throwing into the pit.
Yeah, or the humans that we're also shooting and throwing
or the humans.
Yeah. The seas of death, as it were, that is always around, right? I wonder if maybe we're supposed to read here that the rabbits are like everybody, right? The everyday citizen who also is being killed and thrown into the pit. And all the people that are deviating are sort of a stand-in for the people that a military dictatorship assassinates and kills, because
and suppresses.
Yeah, suppresses. So maybe there's that's going on here. I don't know. I mean, obviously the dictatorship line, the military coups are central in terms of the politics the story is trying to deal with. So, anyways, shall we go to Lazarus the Vulture?
Sure.
That one's by Claudia
Lazarus
Hernandez from El Salvador, translated by Julia Sanchez and Joanna Warren. Which is literally
this one is another short one. It's about a vulture guy, so an anthropomorphized vulture person
Named
who
Lazarus.
is creeping out the companion a little bit because he wants to eat people. And it starts, I believe, at a funeral, and he wants to, like, have a nibble on the body. But then also wants to, like, maybe eat some of the relatives of the friend or the person that this vulture person, Lazarus the Vulture, is with.
Right, and for the main character, the problem comes when Lazarus accidentally cuts one of their children and is, like, licking up the blood, but has in his eye
them,
that look of, like, ravenous look, like he wants to eat it.
I want more.
Yeah. And the narrator at that point realizes that maybe their family isn't entirely safe around him and plots to have him killed, as it were. The thing is, I'm not convinced that Lazarus is, because Lazarus is trying to live among the people and not eat people. And even goes out of his way to apologize for making the narrator uncomfortable and making it seem like he was a danger. So it almost feels like cold-blooded murder. Yes.
So this is one I'm trying to find if I can quickly find the line. So Lazarus wanted to eat her just like the dog he'd eaten the corpse he wished he'd eat at the funerals, just like the raw meat.
Meat.
Devoured them with relish.
Meat.
Seeing how nervous... All right, I can't find it right now, but basically I read this as Predators Among Us.
I mean...
Like a human, effectively, right? And he is making comments like, I'm sorry, it's just my nature. Like, I'm really trying to fight it, to not do this. And the fear and the realization that maybe there needs to be a separation so that this doesn't happen. That just simple wanting to control it is not going to be able to overcome those innate urges or those innate predatory things.
Yeah, I mean, maybe that's what they're going for. I guess it didn't quite land. It still felt like cold-blooded murder to me.
It really just seemed to me to be an allegory for predation amongst humans, but...
Well, and ironically, the
any
narrator
ilk that you wanted
one,
to make it. But...
Yeah, the narrator's the one that's the predator. Because, again, everything in this story, Lazarus never actually eats anybody, dead or alive. He never...
No.
Right, the most he ever does is he accidentally hurts somebody and then licks their wounds. It's the narrator who ultimately falls to violence. Yeah, there's something else there that I'm not sure what to do with. Maybe it's jealousy, because everybody loves Lazarus except the narrator.
This is one I must have to read it again then, because this is one I only read quickly.
Yeah,
once.
It could be jealousy
because it's only like 4 pages long. So
yeah, there's certainly something here about also like the foreigner here, because they make a point multiple times in the story of saying that that Lazarus doesn't have his papers, which means we take that literally because he is a vulture man. He's literally like a vulture person. So why would he have papers? He doesn't. He's not from like human nation contexts don't make sense. But you could maybe read that also as like they're exoticizing him even further. I think maybe jealousy could be how you could read the end of the story, because the main character basically says, right, I even suggested that maybe he had never existed, that his name wasn't Lazarus, that he was merely a collective dream.
Yeah.
Which is like to unmake him, to take him away, to remove him from the community. Why would you do that unless you didn't want people to think about what they had lost? And you wouldn't care about that unless you thought that they shouldn't care for that individual at all. That to me reads like jealousy, which is a motivator for why people kill.
I thought they were just trying to get rid of a monster. Like they came to the point where they just couldn't trust and you have to put down a monster. But maybe I was just reading it too surfacely.
Well, if so, I did not come to that conclusion, but maybe that's what the author was going for.
So here you go, a 4-page story, and we had like completely different...
True. Lazarus is innocent. He was murdered in cold blood. I'm coming it out there. Sorry. Don't look.
I can see that now. Yeah. but I didn't. Yeah, that is not how I first read it. But.
Configuration Queen has said in chat, Vulture Man does whatever a vulture
does
can.
Whatever a vulture
Stabby
can.
beak, flies were well, sends his enemies straight to hell. Look out, here flies Vulture Man. A+.
Until you shoot him.
Oh. Well.
All right. Last story.
One of the good
The
ones.
House of Compassion.
Yeah.
By Camilla Sosa Viada from Argentina,
Camilla.
translated by Camilla.
Yeah.
Translated by Kit Maud.
It would be Camilla Sosa Viada. And I may get the stresses
I
a little bit off.
I can only try to pronounce things as I would in French. So.
Well, I want to be clear. I am also not getting it 100% right. I just know that 2 L's make a U sound. So.
All right.
So Carturo is probably going to throw me down a mountainside. Yeah. Anyway, okay. So this story is I thought this was a very interesting story. It's one of the, I think it is the longest one in the entire.
It is, yes, or close to, yeah.
Pretty close to it. And the main brunt of the story is there's a stretch of road where there are a number of things going on in that stretch. One is that there are numbers of accidents happening on this road because the dogs keep walking out into the road and causing accidents. There is Flor de Ceibo, who is a prostitute / trans person who has had a fairly traumatic past, who is engaged in these behaviors. And then there is the House of Compassion itself, which is some sort of religious monastery.
A nunnery.
For nuns. A nunnery, yeah, a nunnery, mm-hmm. which has some very disturbing activities going on. Dark secrets involving perhaps the dogs. It's a story that I really enjoy.
Dogs.
Dogs, question mark, or something else. It's a story I really, really did like. This is going to be one of those controversial ones because it is dealing with some pretty difficult subject matter in the issue of trans individuals and abuse of children and so on and so forth. And it is a bit of a tragic story, which fits the horror genre pretty well because that's fairly common. So, but a story that I thought was very well written, very compelling. And when the supernatural finally arises, right, there's so much meat for us to pick at about what's going on here. I do note that there's a bunch of stuff in here in the chat that's happening. Cartero said some people spell their names the foreign way, like Martha instead of Martha, or Deniea instead of Daniela. In such cases, you can read it the English way. Well, I appreciate that, Cartero. But please don't hesitate to yell at me about my pronunciation, because I do actually want to be. I mean, I know I'm never going to be a native speaker, as it were, or fluent. Well, I might be one day. I don't know, but I do appreciate being corrected. It does help. I try. Is what I'm saying. I
should learn more than I know.
Yeah.
So currently.
Well, I mean, I think this goes to, we try a lot of times, like when we have authors on and stuff, one of the things we'll do at the beginning is always like, we just need to make sure we got your name right.
Well, how do you? Yeah.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm not saying that we'll ever get it perfect because sometimes it's very hard where you have names from language traditions that are different from your own, but I try. I'm trying. Anyway, moving on. This story. So what did you think of it, Daniel?
What I really liked it a lot, and I echo everything. It was one of those I both liked and I disliked, in that I could definitely see the strengths of it, and I loved a large amount of it, but other parts of it were just really hard to read, in terms of the trauma and the sex abuse of children that is in it. But I found it really interesting. I found it interesting also in regard to the first half mainly being horror in a very realistic way, in something that could happen in this world, in our reality. But then in the second half, once we get to the nunnery, that's when the supernatural shit hits the fan. And it becomes another type of horror story on top of that.
Yeah.
So I like the dual nature of that horror. I also thought it was an interesting take or presentation of a trans female character and a sex worker. It was a very, what's the term that I want to use? Compassionate, I think, presentation of them. And the author themselves, or herself, is, I don't know if they're trans, but they were a former sex worker, according to the bio.
Oh.
In the back of the book. And so I found that interesting, too. It definitely gives a personal perspective to that side of the horror, I think.
That is interesting. Yeah, because I would agree that there's the horror in this is two stages. One is that supernatural, and the other is that personal, which gets to like something we said at the very beginning of this, right? Some of the stories in here, you know, the horror isn't explicitly supernatural, sometimes completely not, the opposite. I think that part of what makes that work really well is like when we get to this tragedy at the end, I think we're deeply sympathetic to our main character who has been through these very terrible things. And even though some kind of justice is offered for her at the end in terms of her uncle, that is upset by what eventually comes of that, which is seemingly that she's been replaced, right, in this kind of disturbing reality that emerges here. It's very affecting. I think partly that also helps that because there's so much time in the story, we get to see all of her warts and all of what makes her beautiful. She's a complicated individual. We also get to see what makes her life difficult and hard because she has to negotiate violence constantly. And I think that's something that underneath everything may make this story work for a lot of people who are interested in these issues, that it shows you the various layers of possible violence against somebody from a minority position, a position of being marginalized, of not having
and how
much
you
power.
Survive and transcend that.
Yeah.
You survive and transcend that too. Because the story is also, it's not just horror in a realistic sense and horror in a fantastic sense, but it's also two types of monsters in this story, right? There's very human monsters, and then there's the sort of fantastic monsters in it. And I'm still uncertain about the ending, because there's, again, a lot of ambiguity here, I think, in terms of what this means for her. In that, is it totally bad? Is it good? Or is it somewhere in between? She's replaced, but at the same time, they use her as a template to make a monster to destroy the things that were preying upon her, right? To some degree.
Yeah.
And so it's almost like harnessing an aspect of her and making a monster out of it.
Say that
You look
again?
befuddled. Or it's the ending to me, in some regards, that double that they make of her, it is a monster that's now preying on those that preyed upon her. So in some way, they take an aspect of her that has survived and fought and make a monster out of it. Harness a monster from it.
Oh, yeah, I could kind of see that.
That's akin to the monsters that they have there, those dog-like things. But then at the same time, it's not good for her though either, because she's basically like drugged. She's basically at their mercy now, and they're controlling her. And she's almost a prisoner there, right? And right. So
the implication is to some degree that she has been drugged, right?
Yeah.
It's not 100% clear she believes she's been drugged, which she might have been, but it does mean like there's that lack of control. That this is part of the tragedy, right? Which is these nuns who seem like they're good are actually the opposite for her.
Are not. Yeah.
They're the opposite.
But then at the same time, there's a monster created from her.
Yeah.
Or using her that then is unleashed. And so it now has a power that she was never able to have as a human. So I found interesting things in there, and I'm still not entirely sure where to take the story because I think there is so much to unpack in it.
There is, yeah. This is one where I definitely want to reread it. I was thinking about trying to teach it, but that might be I need more time. This is a hard one.
It's a tough one, yeah.
Yeah. This is not a beginning of the semester story, as it were.
No,
this is maybe so after I primed them. Yeah. Yeah, this is a really interesting story, though. Yeah, and it is unsettling.
But I think that's again, I think that's what really, if I had to sum up the entire 10-story collection, it would be unsettling and interesting. Lots of ways the stories could be taken, but all of them work really well as unsettling, creepy horror in different ways.
I agree. Yeah, it's a very good collection overall. I think it's worth grabbing. Yeah,
I will note, I don't know if this plug counts for anything, but I did notice that it was on the Chicago Review of Books, 12 books to read in from March. And so it was their list of one of the top releases of March to read.
Oh, interesting. Okay. Yeah. Well,
so it has been getting really good press from the coverage that it has gotten.
Which is great because we need.
And I would echo that. And we need these books. Yeah.
Yeah, we need definitely more of this. This is a lot of fun, Daniel. We'll talk about this book. Yeah.
Yeah, well, thanks for agreeing to do it.
I like reading books.
And humoring me.
You're welcome, Daniel. I like to
wait,
humor you.
What are we doing, Daniel?
Yeah. No, I think it's fine. This is very interesting.
What did you send to me?
It is weird. It is a weird book, though. There's a lot of weirdness in here, and I like it. Prince Justin says in chat, reading is fundamental. Anyway. Well, okay. I think we made a podcast. Yeah, Daniel?
Yeah, I believe so.
Cool. Well, this is a reminder
hopefully we didn't
for
miss
folks.
Anything.
We probably did, but that's okay because we made a podcast.
Yeah, we're
that's
over.
Yeah. It's a long one.
Oh, shut up.
So, folks at home, whether you are with us live or watching or listening somewhere else, if you would like to make suggestions or tell us what you thought about this episode, or you have read this collection and you want to offer thoughts, or there's a cultural context we've missed or something you want to let us know, there are two places you can do that. There is the listener suggestions form at skiffingfanny.com/listener suggestions, and then our email is skiffingfanny@gmail.com. We are Skiffy and Fanty pretty much anywhere except Twitter. So Blue Sky, Threads, Insta, TikTok, blah, blah, blah. There will be TikToks eventually because I do have some shorts that I got to edit. So please follow us at all those places. We have a Patreon, which is, again, the patreon.com/skiffyfanty, and you can review us on all of the places because that'll help out. We have a link tree for all the links to all our things, which is linktr.ee/skiffyandfanty. Easy enough. So find us in all the places. Please support the show, and please tell people about the show because word of mouth for independent shows is massively important. So if you like an episode, post it on your socials and tell people, I like this episode. It was great. It was the wonderfulest thing ever. If you want to copy that and just paste that with your text and put hashtag Skiffy Rules, you can do that. I'm in lots of places. ShaunDuke.net. I'm obviously on this channel, Alphabet Streams, Tuesdays and Thursdays at 7 p.m. Central, usually. And I also have Patreon and all of that stuff, and I'm on Blue Sky, blah, blah, blah. And my link tree is just /ShaunDuke with a U. So.
And you can find me at Reading 1000 Lives on Blue Sky. That's 1000 for 1000. And at reading1000lives.com, where I have my book reviews, and I have reviews in lots of outlets, including, of course, the Skiffy and Fanty blog. So if you are not reading the Skiffy and Fanty blog, you are missing wonderful things on there. Most of those wonderful things actually come from Trish and Paul, but you will find those wonderful things there.
Perfect. Well, as is required by the Skiffy and Fanty bylaws, I need to make it awkward. And the thing that Daniel does not know is that by agreeing to be on this show today, I have been selectively copying aspects of his personality to clone him, as it were, into a dog person. And so, Daniel, you're going to begin to feel very sleepy. Very sleepy,
Will
Daniel.
I have horse hooves as well?
No, you're going to be locked in a dungeon while your doppelganger wanders the streets causing car accidents.
Alrighty.
You seem weirdly okay with that.
Do I get books in the dungeon?
Sure.
Then yeah, sure, let's do that.
Okay, great. Well,
all right, may the microbes be with you.
An awkward ending and scene.